What's up, everybody? I think we're live. I need to make sure here. Hang on just a second. All right, here we are. Hello, everybody. My name is Luke Thomas. The time is a few minutes past 1:04 p.m. on, I never know the date, man. I never know the date. I stumble from one deadline to the next. It is July 24th, 2014. This is the weekly live chat that I do here on MMA Fighting. Today on the agenda, let me make sure audio works. We'll talk about the Nevada Athletic Commission hearings from yesterday involving Chael, Sonnen, and Vitor Belfort. We'll certainly get to the new matches that were added, things like Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier. We'll get to Jon Jones versus now Daniel Cormier instead of Alexander Gustafsson. We'll get to whatever really you want to talk about. Whatever's on your mind, this is your chat as much as it is mine. Just let me know. And you can do that on MMAfighting.com, where you should be able to watch this little window right here. The best place to get the questions in are either on Twitter. You can tweet me at SBNLukeThomas, or you can get, even more importantly, you can get on the comment section where this window is embedded on MMAfighting.com and leave a comment in the comment section. Talk to other readers to get the whole 9 yards. And then last but not least, if you'd be so kind, please let folks know you're watching. Get on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, social media. Punch someone in the face. Well, don't punch someone in the face, but, you know, scream in their face that you're watching. Whatever you have to do in public or private to let folks know you're watching this, please do, because your help is greatly appreciated. And, of course, thank you for joining me today. And I was supposed to do this thing where but I actually biked to work today in D.C. I had to change shirts, so I looked mildly presentable. And it's 10,000 degrees Kelvin in D.C. It's 100% humidity. We have the new tiger mosquitoes. Have you guys seen this? They're like white and black on their legs at least, and they're the ones who carry the, I think it's chikungunya virus, among any other third world communicable diseases. So I'm drinking water. It's the long story short, because it's just sweating my ass off getting here. All right. With that out of the way, and thank you for joining me again, let's get to the questions, shall we? All right. And as you notice, by the way, I set up today's post like a video post. That way, it would be, you hopefully won't lose the window halfway through the broadcast. I also added a poll up top about, were you satisfied by the Nevada Athletic Commission's rulings in the cases of Chael, Sonnen, and Vitor Belfort? Go ahead and contribute, and I'll check out those results later in the show, whatever it is. By the way, if there's any topic I talk about, it's probably because you're asking me. You know which one topic I'm referring to. So if you don't want me to cover it, don't ask. All right. First question. Green. Why does the UFC consider having pay-per-views overseas? When pay-per-view is supposedly half of their revenue, and it's been stated time and time again that overseas pay-per-views never do well, why does Danny keep mentioning it in the media? He did it with the Jones-Gustafsson 2, considering it to be in Sweden, obviously, wasn't going to happen, and now it's been confirmed for Vegas. Now he's doing it with Weidman and Belfort, considering it to take place in Brazil. Sure, the live gates might do well, but don't they suffer in pay-per-view buy rates? Why even bother mentioning it in the media? Yeah, it's a couple of reasons, I think, but the most important is, at least, so it depends in a lot of circumstances. Certainly in the Jones-Gustafsson case, part of that was leverage. Now, I'm sure it's true that they wanted to do that in Sweden, that they would like to have a big title fight there. I don't think that is some sort of, there's some ulterior motive beyond that necessarily. I think you can fairly say that's what they want to do, but also remember the UFC likes to be able to say, here's who's going to fight, here's when they're going to fight, and here's where they're going to fight, and what we say goes. In reality, fighters have a little bit more leverage should they choose to exercise it at the higher ranks. We're talking about a title fight here, and I think that's what happened. I think Jones probably said that there's just no way I'm going to go fight at 4 in the morning in another man's country. That's just not going to happen. So ultimately, that's what happened there. So I think it's sort of two things in that particular circumstance. One, sort of leveraging to get the fans to get Jones to sign up for this bout, and then two, because they really want to do it there. I mean, here's the reality. with pay-per-view being sort of still the large component of Zuffa's revenue, it hamstrings them a little bit in terms of the mobility of their product. Like, they often say their product is very mobile, and it is. There's no doubt about that. And Conor McGregor is sort of that sweet spot where they don't have a championship caliber fighter yet, and yet he's able to do some big numbers, at least in early stages, even fighting outmatched opposition. So that really works out well for them. But ultimately, though, like, I remember I talked to Marshall Zelaznik about why they were going abroad and in the way in which they were going abroad, which is to say both as an elite content provider and then also sort of as a de facto regional provider in some circumstances. And his answer was that they believed they could kickstart a market, that if MMA was already there, they could make it hotter, and that if MMA wasn't there, they could at least do something to plant the seeds to get the wheels turning. And so I think they've been successful in some places doing that. I think they haven't been in others. But I think what they're trying to do is say, we got to get some title fights off of Fox, Big Fox, and off of pay-per-view and get them to some of these other countries. Because if Conor McGregor can do big numbers in Ireland, and he's a bit of a special case, but if Conor McGregor can do big numbers in Ireland, certainly it stands to reason that Gustafsson, albeit at a strange time frame, in a title fight against a huge name like Jon Jones, what could that do? How much could that raise the bar? If we can get people enthusiastic, in theory, about their hometown guys and then a decent guy but not a championship caliber guy, what can we get with a championship fight, literally? They have been able to do that on pay-per-view because, as you mentioned, it is hard to do the buy rates there. If all your media is in Sao Paulo and it's not in Chicago, it's not in Toronto, it's not in cities that purchase pay-per-view, it's just so much harder to rally people, not just to the live gate, but also to just make an impact. It's hard for ESPN to follow you if your fight's in Brazil. It's much easier if your fight is in Madison Square Garden. Of course, I'm talking about boxing in that particular case. So you get the idea. I think they're trying to, even with the pay-per-view limiting their mobility, they're trying to find a way to squeeze it in. But there's, between Vitor's issues in Nevada and the time issues in Sweden and who knows what else is going on, it just hasn't worked out for them quite yet. I'm assuming that they will do it at some point, but not yet. Yeah, I'll wreck this up. Signals and Noise article. A couple days ago, you wrote in your article there was, quote, the overreaction to the level of talent on display was almost comical, referring to the Ireland card. Can you elaborate on that thought? Yeah, certainly. What's been really interesting to me to notice about Fight Pass is that, and listen, I had a good time watching UFC Fight 946, like the rest of you did, and I heard about shit. There's very, very little negative to say about it. Assuming that you understand what you're looking at, right? Which is to say, we'll see what happens with Norman Park. Probably deserves a UFC contract. I want to take anything away from him. We'll see how high he goes. I'll just sort of take a non-committal approach to him so far and take it as it comes. But that's certainly the top three fights were UFC caliber main event, no doubt about it. Ian McCall versus Brad Pickett, no doubt about it. What was the fight now that I'm now forgetting? Gunnar Nelson versus Zach Cummings. Fair enough, right? So those are all three UFC caliber fights. But the reality is the rest of that card was a Cage Warriors card. Many of those guys were Cage Warriors veterans. And what's sort of interesting to me is that if you take those exact same fights and you put a Cage Warriors label on it, a modest amount of people will watch it. If you take, sorry, I ate peanuts before I got on air. If you take it and put a UFC label on it and then stack a little bit extra on top, people all of a sudden start looking at it differently. Like, oh, well, this is like, look at all these diamonds in the rough they found. Dude, those diamonds were always there. Part of Conor McGregor's story is a testament to how much better the regional scene has gotten, particularly abroad. I think there has been a contraction in the regional scene in North America. Part of that was just excess promotions being involved, and a reshifting of the balance of power. For example, people aligning themselves with the UFC, like RFA. That didn't really exist in quite such explicit terms a few years ago. But Cage Warriors is one of those shows that's been producing. Look at Jin Juric, who's fighting Joanna. I don't know if it's Jin Juric or Yin Juric, but Yin Jurcic is fighting on the Fox card. Another Cage Warriors veteran. right? It's a Cage Warrior show that you were watching. It was a regional show with 3 UFC fights stacked on top of it. And that's fine because it sold 9,000 tickets. It was a Fight Pass show. What else are you really supposed to put on there? But people reacting like, wow, like Neil Seery, you know, this guy might be a contender at flyweight. All the credit in the world to him and how much he's improved as a fighter. He is who he is. He's you know, saying he's somehow a contender at flyweight is just not an accurate statement. And, you know, we'll see what happens with Carl Pendred. I didn't think he fought up to his potential. I don't, you know, I think we have to have managed expectations about him, but I don't think that was the best he could do. But that's what you're looking at. That's what you saw. You saw a Cage Warrior show with 3 UFC fights on top of it, and people are acting like these are all UFC caliber fights. Like, no. And when I say UFC caliber, I understand it's a moving definition, but these are not the elite of the elite. Some are the elite of the elite, not most of those guys. It's just not true. So that's what I'm sort of talking about. Was people? I was seeing this reaction online, like this dude's a stud. I'm like, this dude is a regional level fighter, and there's nothing wrong with being a regional level fighter. I could never be a regional level fighter, but that's still what you are. You have to call things accurately and by what they are and the level at which they occupy. And I understand the UFC is doing a good service for Ireland and promoting Conor McGregor the way they did. I think they did everything right there. I have no complaint about that. But I don't want people watching these regional level shows with a UFC labeling on it and all of a sudden thinking that this is something that it's not. Jon Jones disqualification against Hamill. If Jones had not been disqualified against Hamill, a win against Cormier would be his 16th consecutive victory inside the UFC, which of course would have equaled Anderson's record. How much more marketable would Jones be overall, in your opinion, if he had 0 losses on paper? First of all, I'm not sure that's true. He has, I believe his record is, I could be wrong about this. Before I open my mouth here. All right, Jon Jones. Oh, you might be right. Jesus, really? No, because the 7th fight, yeah, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yeah, you're right, it is. This will be 16. Holy shit. Ooh, sorry. Yeah, dude, he's a bad guy, man. Sorry about that. God, I didn't realize that he had that many fights in the UFC. I think he's less marketable because of the way he's been handled by management, which is partly his own fault, although very little, and then partly the way UFC has handled him. UFC has promoted Anderson Silva when there wasn't a lot of natural enthusiasm about him beyond the hardcore community. He aided that by the way in which he won, but they really pushed him very, very hard. And they have pushed Jones. It'd be unfair to say that they haven't pushed Jones. But there's also been friction between the two parties. I mean, I think that's a fairly accurate statement to make. Not just UFC 151, that was really bad, but other times as well. Jones wants to be his own man and doesn't want to live in anyone else's shadow and doesn't want to march to anyone else's drum. And I think that has naturally caused a rift between he and the fan base and naturally caused a rift between he and management, albeit in different ways. And I just feel like that has been the issue. Also, again, I'll keep mentioning it. It's a fair point to UFC. It's a fair point to boxing as well. We're in a different pay-per-view space. Like the fact that he doesn't quite pull the same numbers as Silva did at UFC 101, MMA, at least in North America, not nearly as hot as it used to be. Pay-per-view as a medium generally not nearly as hot as it used to be, or at least as a viable way to make tremendous profit. Still is, but not in the same way. All those factors have contributed, but it's. I don't think they lost and then certainly it's an unfortunate blemish. And maybe if he had an undisputed record, it would be a nice twist into the way he was promoted. But that's not really the issue. Of all the things I could point to and be like, why isn't he a bigger? That's probably fairly low on the list of things you can point to. Kazushi Sakuraba, legend or myth? I started watching MMA roughly 3 years ago when Pride was long out of business, so I never really got to see his glory days. Boy, did you miss out. Looking at his record, it wasn't all that great. He has some notable wins, and even though a 90-minute match with Royce Gracie, which is certainly no easy feat and something we'll probably never see in MMA again. Can you talk about his legacy and why he's regarded as one of the greats? Also, who are your top fives from Pride? He had huge national hero in Japan, had crossover appeal from pro wrestling. beat the Gracies at a time when some of that was thought unthinkable. Not unthinkable, but very difficult to do. Earned the nickname the Gracie Hunter. Certainly he had fought guys far outside of his normal weight class, took tremendous beatings, but that also added to his appeal. He was this guy who was this warrior, fight at all costs. He was a showman. He was everything that Japanese MMA was great about it. Guys who fought until they absolutely could not fight anymore. Guys that took on all challenges, and guys that accomplished legitimately great things. Beating Henzo, beating Hoyler, beating Hoyce, and other notable fighters as well. But it wasn't that he just had this sort of like Jon Jones. The game is different now. The game is a little bit more prize fighter-ish. And back then it was a little bit more martial arts, sort of funky challenge kind of thing. The game is different now. And partly I think that's why actually guys are a little bit less stars than they used to be, at least domestically. And for the other reasons I mentioned before. But no, dude, Sakuraba's reputation is well-deserved. He is far and away my favorite Japanese fighter of all time. A total unique personality, a guy who was a showman, a guy who was a destroyer, also had an interesting style of grappling, came from the catch wrestling school, and so he had legitimate credentials. He had actually wrestled in Japanese university as well, American wrestling. Not American wrestling, but, international wrestling, amateur wrestling, and was... his reputation is absolutely well-deserved. It may not look... I mean, you look at Randy Couture's record, it's not... I mean, he's got some great wins on there. He's got a lot of losses. BJ Penn's record has a lot of losses. But both those guys... It's kind of funny. I wouldn't want to overstate the parallels. But those guys also came from the same generation where you wanted to take on interesting challenges. Couture less so, but certainly in Penn's case, jumping up all these different many weight classes from 145 all the way up to basically heavyweight. And in some senses, Sakuraba was that as well. Sakuraba fought even when he was injured. He was just this guy. He was like Hulk Hogan who did MMA, in a sense. And yeah, man, he's amazing. Anderson Silva's next fight. You hear any rumblings on who his next opponent is? If it's not Nick Diaz, I quit. How do you not make that fight, dude? Is DC versus Jones as great as it sounds? Cormier is out of shape and has less time to not only lose the weight but prepare for the pound-for-pound king. Also, his knees are not 100%, which will no doubt lower his shot, which is his... I'm trying to decipher what your English is here, which is his greatest weapon in the fight. Because of this, I personally don't think this fight will be as competitive as it could have been 6 months down the line. Shame that if DC loses... It was his only shot as he is at the end of his career at 35. Couple of responses. One, I don't think Daniel Cormier would take it if he didn't really think he had a chance to win. I'm sure he thinks this isn't necessarily his optimal chance, like he's not 100% healthy, but healthy enough to beat Jon Jones. If he didn't think he could actually show up on there and beat Jon Jones on that night, I just don't think he'd take that fight. And I don't think he thinks he can beat Jon Jones under any circumstance. I think he thinks he can beat Jon Jones under most circumstances, and this falls into that, albeit probably the shallower end. These Olympic athletes, man, these guys who've been competing forever, they know their bodies, and you really have to. Dominic Cruz talked about it on the MMA Hour with Ariel, about how much in tune with your body you have to be, how much you have to know what your body can do and what it can't, how much you can push it and how much you can't, how much pain you can tolerate, at what point are you really sacrificing productivity, at what point are you really sacrificing the key portions of your game that are necessary to achieve and win. And I think he's making a best guess here. Maybe after the fight's over, he's like, you know what, I shouldn't have done that. Or maybe he wins. I don't know. But I don't think he would accept this agreement, even as great as an opportunity it is, if he thought he was going to go in there and just get shellacked, because the injury is so severe. It requires such medical necessity. I just don't buy that. I think he really understands his body, particularly now at his advanced age and making 205 the way he is, and even Mike Dolce saying he can make 185 without any loss of performance, which, by the way, is crazy but probably true. So there's that. Secondly, so first of all, I will just say that. Secondly, I'm expecting a very capable Daniel Cormier on Fight Night. I am not expecting a hobble Daniel Cormier. I am not expecting a guy who's going to have hugely taped up knees. I'm not expecting a guy that's going to be clearly deficient. I don't think necessarily you're going to get the very, very best Daniel Cormier, but I don't know that you need the very, very, very best to beat Jon Jones. To be honest, maybe you do. We'll find out in the end. I really don't know who to pick in this fight, and I always have this sort of rule of thumb where if you have two elite competitors and you're looking at how they match up, and you can kind of see one way it might go and kind of see another way it might go, but you don't really know, which is kind of how I feel most people think. Yes, Daniel Cormier has fans who think he's going to run over him, and yes, Jon Jones has, believe it or not, fans I think he's just going to beat him, or people who are very confident in his abilities. I really don't know which way this one's going to go. I really don't. Said the same thing about Lyoto Machida and Chris Weidman. And I think a lot of us felt the same way. For different reasons, we didn't quite know exactly what to make of Chris Weidman, but a better sense now. But I definitely think that, like, Jon Jones is going to get tested, boy. He's going to get put on his rear end a couple of times, and he's going to have to get out of that. And he's going to have to fight off the relentless pressure of Daniel Cormier. And Jon Jones is going to have to hurt him. Daniel Cormier has never really been hurt. He's been, I don't even think he's had his bell rung once since he's fought in mixed martial arts. Not in any noticeable way. You're gonna have to put it on him. You're gonna have to stop his wrestling. You're gonna have to really take it to him. You're gonna have to make him fight defensively, and that is a very hard thing to do. Daniel Cormier's game is very much move forward and attack and control every dimension of it, leave nothing to chance, or at least very little to chance anyway. That's a hard task, man. That's a hard task, and I think he can do that even at a biological disadvantage. I think Daniel Cormier is the best athlete Jon Jones has ever fought. All respect to Alexander Gustafsson, I don't think he's the athlete that Daniel Cormier is. Now, maybe at 34, 35, that equation changes a little bit, but and I also think, and I know Gustafsson fans don't want to accept it, but I think they kind of need to. Yes, Jon Jones knew he was fighting Gustafsson, and yes, he had an opportunity to do a perfect camp and didn't, or whatever you want to believe. But part of the way in which Gustafsson won, and this is going to sound crazy, but I believe it, is surprise. Is the element of surprise. Jon Jones did not train for that Gustafsson. He didn't realize what he had gotten himself into, and that is hard to reproduce a second time. Unless you truly believe that Jon Jones who walked in there against Alexander Gustafsson was fully prepared, fully ready, fully confident, that's the best you're going to get out of him, then sure, then you think that Gustafsson can just pick up where he left off. I don't believe that at all. I don't think at all that was the best Jon Jones. He was a very good Jon Jones, not the best. And I think if he fought Gustafsson again, he'd do a lot of things differently. Now, there is also the question about Jon Jones' toe and his wrestling. And if you watch this chat, I have pointed out numerous times, if there's one phase of the game that Jones used to use to mix up his offense, it was his wrestling. People have caught up to him. Daniel Cormier will be no exception to that. That will be a big thing to watch here. That will be a very key ingredient to this fight, is to what extent does Jon Jones have the ability to integrate takedowns as a means of differentiating his offense. Didn't work very well against Glover Teixeira. I have a hard time seeing how it worked really well against Daniel Cormier, even one who might have a bit of a knee issue. Let's see if this is 118. All right. If there's any issues with audio, like tweet me or something. I'm trying to do a few different things here. All right, everything seems to be okay. So I have to check in, man, because I'm using all this new equipment. Just got to make sure, son. All right, I guess there were some issues. All right. Okay. Hickson Gracie. Luke, Hickson Gracie was recently on Joe Rogan's podcast and has some interesting comments on MMA versus real fighting. He said he doesn't believe that MMA truly represents who would win in a real fight due to the fact that the limit time frame is more beneficial to offensive-oriented fighters, and there's not any time to implement defense. He also went on to say that given no time limit, he could have in his prime beaten Jon Jones and Velasquez, and also believes Corone could do the same thing in a no time limit setting. I was wondering your take on his comments. Well, I certainly admire his barbarian spirit. I mean, there's no denying he's got that in spades. But it's a little bit crazy. All right, sorry, I just had to refresh this. It's a little bit crazy. So I have this debate with people at my gym too at jiu-jitsu. They're like, well, guard pulling should be penalized. Well, why? Right? It's like, I think I talked about this last week. It's like, well, it's not what you do in a normal street fight. It's like, dude, you wouldn't play half the guard games you play in a normal street fight. You wouldn't play Spider Guard. Working for an omoplata from Spider Guard. Guard in a real street fight, guard would be your last line of defense, and you probably can sweep most people pretty damn easily who don't know what they're doing. Standard scissor sweep or a butterfly sweep is going to get just about everybody. Even guys with good base. The question is this: what constitutes a real street fight? What does that even mean? It doesn't really mean anything. It means a range of things. Is it daylight? Are there people around? Do they have weapons? Are you on grass? Are you on gravel? Is it at a nightclub? Are you drunk? Is he drunk? Are they drunk? Are you on drugs? Are there cars? Is there cameras? Is it one-on-one? Are people interfering? What does it mean to have a street fight? Street fights don't look like one thing. MMA looks like one thing, kind of, because you've set limits. And so that illustrates the point, actually. It's like MMA has a ton of limits on them, things you can do, regulated, same weight classes, the unified rules, the whole bit. And even then, the fights can look 1,000 different ways. Street fights at that times that in an exponential way. There's no such thing as having a street fight, like as if it's one universal standard. Now, I am sympathetic to Hickson's point that if you extend the time limit, defense becomes a much more serious component of your game because you have to have those things to survive that long. Because the rounds in MMA are 5 minutes, you can get a great athlete, teach him a lot of skills. If he's tough, he can just drive forward and through 25 minutes or 15 and come out the victor. I'm sympathetic to that defense. MMA is a very offensive game. It's not like boxing where defense is really, really critical. Defense is critical in mixed martial arts too, but offense carries much more significance. If you're a big power puncher, you don't have to have the cleanest technique, and that goes for boxing. But even the big power punchers there have better technique, right? I mean, the way in which MMA is suited for offense, it just tilts the balance dramatically. So I am sympathetic to that point. But this construction about what there is in a street fight is just nonsense. And the guys being like, oh, you shouldn't do guard pulling, and then they're over there doing reverse De La Hiva. It's like, dude, who are you trying to fool here? You get taken down in a jiu-jitsu match, and your first instinct on a knee slice pass is to grab the ankle underneath? No, it isn't. And first of all, the person on top is not going to be, because there's a way if they're doing a knee slice pass. So if you're on your back and they actually drive the knee and the shin across the inside of your thigh, underhook on the far side, so you can't take their back. There's a common pass. It's called the knee slice pass. And one of the ways in which to stop it is to actually go underneath your own leg with the hand inside their passing and grab the back of their ankle, and then sort of push and pull like that. It's like, dude, who is going to do that in a street fight? Even if he tries, let's say he doesn't know what a knee cut pass is, but he's trying to pin your leg down to throw a punch, who is going to reach under and grab their heel? No one's going to do that. You're using a bunch of things selectively that you'd never use in a street fight while criticizing guard pulling. Now, listen, I think takedowns are more important in an actual fight, but I'm just sort of pointing out people play with these ideas and without really consideration that the idea means a number of different things with so many different variables and so many different considerations. He told a story Hickson did of fighting Yoji Anjo. It's a great story, but is that a street fight? I mean, yes, but many other street fights are nothing like that. The other guys could have jumped in, or maybe his students could have jumped in, or it could have taken place in the parking lot rather than the gym. All kinds of crazy things could have happened, and Hickson could have gotten his head slammed on the concrete. It's like, what is a street fight? It's hard to define. It's just simply two people fighting in a unregulated context, and when it's unregulated, it is the expanse to which it covers things is enormous. DC a tougher challenge for Jones. I think I've kind of already answered that. True, false. Luke Thomas will one day do the live chat with less than a full beard. Highly unlikely, but always possible. Luke Thomas will be at the MGM Grand for UFC 178. No. Mike Chiappetta will one day be on the panel for MMA Beat Again. Certainly hope so. Nurmagomedov's injury is the most disappointing MMA news for you in 2014. It's up there. If you were running an MMA organization, fighters would be banned from riding motorcycles. Yes. Luke Thomas is a Real Madrid fan now. I am a James Rodriguez fan. I don't know about Real Madrid. I guess the two are so intertwined. We'll see. If I ask extremely politely via email, Luke Thomas will unblock me on Twitter. Yes. Just email me. Thoughts on Gunny? Was it just, I think you mean Gunnar Nelson, was it just me, or was that not incredibly impressive how he literally turned the fight in a matter of seconds? It was almost like an old Anderson Silva fight where he would just feel the person out, then when he was ready, just start teeing off and end the fight shortly thereafter. Curious if you saw the same thing. I did and I didn't. So it's impressive. Like Zach Cummings beat Jan Cabral, who is a respected jiu-jitsu black belt out of Nova União, and they went the distance. And Zach Cummings won, I believe. For Nelson to go in there and just put him away once he went turtle, and then he beat the arm on the turtle, because if you want to circle around someone, if they hold their arm up, you can't go around them. You have to you go back and watch. You have to beat the arm, and once you beat the arm and he gets around it, it was a wrap, son. It was just lightning quick from there on out. From that portion of the fight, I thought it was super impressive. I will say though, I was not overwhelmed necessarily by the. I think Nelson could have put a higher pace on him. He picked it up in the second. Okay, he's still learning. That's fine. Wasn't impressed necessarily with his takedowns. I'm impressed with the defensive nature of his striking, less so with the offensive nature. It's like Justin Scoggins, but with less attacks. I don't know. I think he's still got a lot of work to do, and I think UFC sees that. There's a lot of hope for him, a lot of optimism, a lot of well-placed and well-deserved optimism. I certainly cannot wait to see him fight again. I'll be clear about that. But I definitely still think he's still learning how to fight MMA in a way that's most suitable to him and most suitable to the current realities of the modern game. And I didn't think that necessarily it was quite as offensive, quite as wrestling. His takedowns need work, you know. They just, I don't know. Let's see. UFC 175 pay-per-view buys. Any word on the number? I know it did around 400,000, but anything else more accurate? I have not heard. Hopefully Dave Meltzer has a report soon. Is the Nevada Athletic Commission in the pocket of the UFC? Licensing Belfort after his failed tests is ridiculous. Him fighting in Vegas now and UFC 178 being announced shortly before the hearing seems... No, UFC 178 was not announced before the hearing. It was announced right after the result came. Seems fishy to me. Does the commission simply look out for what is best for their pockets, big fights in Vegas? Are they influenced by Zuffa, or are they incompetent? I don't think they're incompetent, or not hugely incompetent. I don't know what to say about that. I've been thinking about that since it happened. Well, first of all, in fairness to the UFC, they didn't announce the... it was 170... Excuse me. Let me correct that. 181. The main event between Weidman and Belfort was announced after Belfort's hearing, or his portion of the hearing, was complete. Okay, so let's be fair to them there. Although they had that at the ready, I suppose. I guess here's my issue with the whole thing. At some point, you know, I put the poll up at the top because I think that's the most relevant question you can ask, which is, you know, how clean of a sport do we really want? That's really the answer. Another question you have to sort of figure out. And once we find that answer, I guess we'll have an issue of a place of where to go. Right now, we're in a place where it's not completely open. I mean, there are, you know, we do have a government panel you have to go before. There are some rules and regs. They're not particularly strenuous. Or do we want a sport where it's regulated like it would be by USADA, where these violations would get you 4-year or permanent lifetime bans? May or may not get you hefty fines, but certainly your exclusion from your ability to compete would be significantly sterner. How clean of a sport do you want? Do you want universal blood testing? Do you want universal urine testing? And I think what you get with the Nevada Athletic Commission is basically a mixture of the two extremes of the community. Because there are some in the community who want that USADA-style regulation, and there are some in the community who I think we have to acknowledge just don't care. So I just don't care if these guys are on steroids. Just give me the fights I want to see. I think that portion of the fan base, however repugnant, absolutely exists. That what you saw there yesterday to me was like part regulation and part kabuki theater. You know, it's true that Chael Sonnen did get a 2-year ban. That's real regulation. It's not the most stern regulation, but it's regulation. Vitor Belfort did get a conditional license, but he has to fight in Nevada, and he has to, can't fight before December and so forth. You know all the conditions. He has to pay back the cost of testing and so forth. But a lot of that was just theater. It's perfunctory questioning, BS admonishments from Commissioner Brady specifically. I think your career will be decided here. It's like, okay, old man, whatever. There was Marnell there yesterday who was trying to push a more punitive edge to the whole thing. Ultimately, it didn't really work. I mean, they were gonna do nothing to Sonnen except give him a 1-year suspension and pay back the costs of the testing. After they praised this guy, Kevin Iole wrote about it. Like, on the one hand, they wanted to bury him, and on the other hand, they wanted to take him out for a drink. It was the most bizarre thing. But at the end of the day, the reason why the regulation, everyone talks about like, oh, we're regulated by the government. It's like, that is such a nonsensical statement to me. It's not like they're the cops or the IRS. If you don't pay your taxes, you go to jail. If you don't really do things that the Nevada Athletic Commission wants you to do, there are punishments to be met out, but they're not really that serious. They're semi-serious. They can be serious at times, but they're not consistently serious. It's fairly relaxed as a regulatory environment. But you're the Nevada Athletic Commission. You serve the interests of the state. And what are we really expecting them to do? Create a regulatory climate so severe, so strong, so strict, that it compels people to not bring business there. Is that what we really expect from them? Their job is to regulate the sport and keep fighters safe, and I don't doubt that they have good intentions about that. But they also, realistically speaking, in the world in which we live, cannot be so heavy-handed that they force promoters to take their business to other states. I don't mean like overnight, I mean over time, over the long run. If the cost of doing business from a regulatory standpoint is so strict in Nevada, boxing promoters, and not just UFC, MMA promoters, they just won't do business there. Yes, they would like to do business there, but that's because the regulatory climate, while semi-strict, especially relative to other states, it's still, at the end of the day, it's not so strict that it drives big business away. I think that's just the reality you have to face. They're moving. That was sort of a separate issue, but they're moving. Floyd Mayweather gets a level of justice where he gets his court dates pushed back in a different way because of the considerations of. No, it's not Nevada. It's not the commission issue per se, but I just mean like Nevada generally. If you're in the service of the state, they're pushing back your jail time so that you can generate enough money for the state within a certain specific time frame, which is what happened for him. It's crazy. It's crazy. That's crazy. So, like, when they get up there and like, tell me about the time you went to jail, and they're grilling Alexis Villa, who went to jail in '97, as the poor guy tried to commit suicide. They asked him more questions, and and you got the state's attorney general up there being like, "Yo, this is blatant cheating." Well, you know what? I really like Chael Sonnen. It's like, oh my god, So they go through the motions. And I like Chael Sonnen too. As a guy, every interaction I've ever had with him has been very pleasant. I've been very open about that. I think what he did is totally reprehensible. He seems to have acknowledged as much. But no, I don't think that like NSAC and the UFC are working together. I don't think it's that case at all, man. Because it's not like they show UFC favoritism and they don't show it to like other people. I think what they do is they have a bias towards Nevada because they work for Nevada. That's who they work for. And they're never going to create a regulatory environment that is so stern that people just say, we just can't do business here anymore. And I think that's what they worry about. Do we give someone a lifetime ban so that these guys think twice about bringing big shows here? Nope. Nope, they don't. Do we not book this fight and lose out on what we could do for the state here in terms of Weidman and Vitor Belfort, or do we let them do it? But we'll put some restrictions on it. We'll make sure that that we show a force. Okay, that's what we're going to do. But it's the service of the state. It's the service of the state and regulation of the sport. And I just think that's what we just kind of have to accept. We're always like, oh my God, that Nevada Athletic Commission, they've got this reputation that's like totally outsized of the realities of what they actually do. At the end of the day, That's what they're going to do. They're going to make sure that they have some regulation, some basics, even in some cases, some severe penalties. I'm not saying they never do severe penalties, but over time, generally speaking, the regulatory climate there is not going to be so strict as to drive out business. And I think once you sort of accept that as the framework of what's happening there, it's much easier to understand what they do and what they don't do. There's still things that are like totally insane. I mean, I understand it's a different commission that did it. It was the Kaiser Commission. But, you know, Nick Diaz just getting raked over the coals for smoking weed. I mean, could there be something more inane than that? It's just unbelievably grotesque punishment for such a non-issue that you don't even regulate properly. You know, by just doing urinalysis, like, oh my God. Did you ask a witch doctor? And, you know, did you ask a guy who's a voodoo doll if, you know, the pins and the needles are affecting someone's injury? I mean, it's sort of the same kind of thing, you know. Just the level of scientific rigor there was just embarrassing. So, you know, they're still capable of handing down heavy-handed punishment. I'm not saying that everyone will just get away with everything, but they're going to find creative ways to make certain things work, and they're going to find some ways to not make certain things work. But, like, you know, these are the people we trust with scientific accuracy about drug testing. If you look at the history of athletic commissions, in part they were basically like, and if someone knows more than me about this, let me know. It's a topic I've been researching this past year. I've been wanting to do a bigger story on it. It's just hard to find information. But, like, when did athletic commissions get created? And I looked at the ones in New York, or the one in New York. And basically initially it had nothing to do with testing. It was just so that there was a modicum of regulation in boxing, so that they could make sure that the fights were reasonably fair. There was a tax collected. There was a benefit to the state. Promoters had to have some basic requirements met. I'm not sure if there was licensing for promoters originally, but they had to get basically some government sanctioning, and that was really it. And that's fine as a service of what they do. But when we start getting into drug testing, like, these are the people responsible for it. It's like it's totally beyond the scope of what they're capable of doing. They can barely handle everything not related to drug testing, and then you add that in, and it's a whole nother ballgame. So no, I don't think anyone's in cahoots. I don't think it's anything like that. They serve their own state, and they want their state to have business. They all don't want people to come there and do whatever they think they can do, but it's a fluid situation, and all that stuff about we're going to send a message is just kabuki theater, man. All right, let's see here. Thoughts on McGregor Brandao? Would you... Pardon me. What did you take from the McGregor-Brandao fight? As dominant as McGregor seemed, his ground control looked more due to his size and strength than his skill alone. And the dismantling on the feet, albeit dominant, was hard to tell if he was just that good or Brandao got overwhelmed by the moment. Honestly, even the shots he landed that finished the fight didn't seem like they connected with that much power as Brandao was having at the end of his punch, blah, 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 blah. McGregor just hits a lot harder and more accurately than he appears, or is it that Brandao's wins... Jesus, what is this? Okay, what did I think about it? So to be careful about this. I think that McGregor-Poirier is going to be an extremely close competitive fight. I think that McGregor is clearly a top 10 fighter. I don't know if he's top 5. We're going to find out. But I do think he's a top 10 talent. I think that much is pretty much, you know, without much dispute. However, if you're the biggest Conor McGregor fan, I'm not telling you to abandon hope in him or anything like that. I think he's a breath of fresh air, to be perfectly honest, both promotionally, and I think he's an interesting talent to observe. But the Brimage win, not so much. To an extent, the Holloway win, but that was just a bad matchup for Holloway. But like with the Brandao win, and we'll see what happens in Vegas, but certainly with that Brandao win, he's fighting guys, like if you didn't know who McGregor was, he was just some donk who came from some regional show. And he was fighting Brandao, let's say on the third fight on Fight Pass, on some random Fox Sports 1 card. You'd look at his win and you would say, you know, this is legitimate. But would Brandao really fight the same way? You have to wonder how much of that moment got to him. You know, we can't talk on the one hand about the strength of that Irish crowd and McGregor's control over them and how loud they got and fighting in a main event like that, and in some cases on, you know, doing a short notice basically, short notice at least for McGregor, in preparing for McGregor, I should say. You can't say all those things like, wow, look how big it was, look how amazing it was, look how crazy it was, and then say, well, that has no consideration on how Diego Brandao fought. Of course it does. He's a human being, and he's a human being who fights emotionally. He does. That's sort of his MO, and sometimes it propels him to greatness, and I think in this case, it just overwhelmed him. Which isn't to say that I didn't think McGregor was going to win. I thought McGregor could beat him no matter what, but I did think that Brandao's performance was really lackluster. I thought that there was a point at which McGregor was right, that he just thought, I'm checking out here. This isn't going to go my way. A lot of guys are like that, man. They try something, they feel something, if it doesn't go their way, they don't quit exactly, they just don't fight to the same level of ferocity, which allows people to take over. Although I suppose some people quit. But I think Brandao was just like, once the moment got to him and he realized he wasn't going to be able to do the kind of offense that he wanted, he just didn't sustain the same level of intensity. And once that dropped, McGregor took over. I do think that McGregor has a lot of holes in his technique to fill. I think he does a lot of things well. He has an interesting style. His striking reminds me a little bit of Nick Diaz, which is to say, he doesn't pot shot quite the same way. That's not fair or accurate. But what might be the same way is that he really strikes well from the outside. He gets guys to cover up. He doesn't throw one big bomb, but he just sort of creates a death by 1,000 cuts until someone collapses. Diaz does it much more volume, almost strictly with the hands. McGregor sort of pot-shotting with uppercuts, leg kicks, turning side kicks, all those kinds of things. But it has the same sort of like volume overwhelm effect. And that's clearly the mark of talent, clearly, no doubt about it. The guy's got skills. But I just don't think, on the one hand, you can praise the Irish fans and that environment for all of the insanity that it was, and then sort of say that that fight took place in a vacuum. It didn't. It took place in that environment, and that environment was bat-ass crazy. So I don't know that you got the same kind of thing if no one knew who McGregor was, and maybe no one even knew who Brandao was, and they just fought on some random card at Atlantic City on the third fight on a Fight Pass card. I don't know that it would have looked the same. I would have picked McGregor no matter what, but it maybe have been a little bit closer. We may have gotten a better sense about where McGregor is. Poirier is going to be an interesting test because, I think that no one's going to root against Poirier because it's in the United States, but McGregor has a big fan following even here, so he might get louder cheers. But I think that Poirier is a little too experienced to get overwhelmed like that. It's not a main event slot, and it's going to be a much better test to see where McGregor really is. If you think that McGregor can beat Poirier, I really have no issue with that. I think the kid's very talented. But I'm just not convinced we saw this like complete package performance from Diego Brandao. I think the moment caught up with him. You've always been a tough critic on fight cards. I think I've been a fair critic on fight cards. But this potential 178 card must be close to bringing the inner fanboy out of you. Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier, love it. Dominic Cruz versus Takeya Mizugaki, love it. Sim Kennedy versus Romero, it's a good fight. I mean, I'm not enamored by it, but it's a good fight. Kat Zingano, Amanda Nunes, or Nunes. No one ever has any clarity about which way to go with that one. I'm interested to see the return of Kat Zingano, sure. Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, amazing. John Howard versus Brian Ebersol, I don't really care. Patrick Cote, Stephen Thompson. It's okay. But yes, the card is good. It's definitely worth your pay-per-view money. And I would actually recommend it to other people. I would love to hear... do I want to answer this one? So someone's asking about the interview, the hour-long interview that Ariel did with Conor McGregor. He says, I know you have said interviews are difficult to do, so can you share your insight on the difficulties Ariel must have faced putting that interview together as well as carrying the interview out? The cameraman must have also put in some amazing work. I mean, that is one of those things that folks who just don't do interviews don't understand, And I don't do them quite like Ariel does, either in volume or type, but... dude, that's just ridiculous. First of all, to get the logistics, that guy has a huge fight coming up in his home country. To get him to carve out the time of that and to have the security, the security around them, making sure people didn't mess with him. It takes, you have to be a heavy hitter to even get that kind of consideration. First of all, but beyond that, like if you just watch it, the interview did a couple of things. One, it drew on their actual shared history together, on the time of the things he had said on Ariel's show, and then the callback that they had. And so partly he had to set the ingredients 18 months ago to even make some of that conversation possible. Beyond that, though, so we have the logistic issues, we have the building of what was already there between the two, and the sort of, and how it, not just that those two had those previous comments that they shared, but that how it related to the present reality, much bigger than the show itself. That here's Conor McGregor headlining a show 18 months later, or 17 months later anyway, in Dublin, Ireland. So there's this moment of reflection and the distance traveled and the significance of it. But if you notice, like, it just carries on like a conversation for an hour, because it was a conversation for an hour. You know how hard it is to talk to a fighter for an hour? Even one as good as Conor McGregor in terms of talking. If it looked like a conversation, that's because Ariel's so good at making an interview look like a conversation. It's just there's not many people in the universe who can do something like that, especially in MMA. So, if you get stuff like that, enjoy it while it lasts, because it's not going to be that easy either to set up, or once it's set up to then deliver. It's very, very difficult to do. And they were limited in some circumstances. They couldn't just walk around Dublin. Like Ariel was telling me, when they walked around with Rampage, they were basically left alone. Conor McGregor was walking down next to the highway and people were honking. So they were limited in how far they could go, but they were able to retrace steps and talk about the history and the scope of things and what it meant for Conor and what it meant for Irish MMA and the venue and what was next, and this promise, this fulfillment, all sort of drawing full circle. It's very, 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 very difficult to do stuff like that. And if he makes it look easy, it's not because it's easy. It's because he makes it look easy. Tyrone Spong. Dana White said it's possible he will come for one fight in UFC, and Spong wants to. Who would you think would match up well with Spong in the light heavyweight division? Who can he fight that won't take him down at light heavyweight? I don't know. Krylov would be a fun fight. Krylov keeps winning, even though I'm terrible to him, but he is a terrible fighter. Lawler Brown. Thoughts on this fight and the card overall, please. I think Robbie rips Brown to the body for TKO here, but Brown is as tough as they come. Yeah, my predictions, by the way, are up. I've picked Lawler for this fight. So the issue for me is that I don't think it's fair to say that Brown is weak to the body, because he does get hurt to the body, but then he sort of storms back almost every time. That's not a guy who folds. He may fold for a second, but he doesn't fold. So what I would argue is that he's vulnerable to the body, but you have to be really careful. But that's one consideration. I think Robbie can and will attack it, but I don't think that is itself going to end the fight. It may. Robbie punches a dump truck, but I don't want to oversell the vulnerability there. The other thing I would say though is that Brown might probably do it, basically has to overwhelm guys, especially the top ranked guys. Obviously, he has a lot of time. You get the idea. Better it gets, speaking. He hurts you, striking one the other, and then positionally overwhelms you while he lands. Tremendous ground and pound against the cage to work with that. Standing ground and call it against the cage. So that's what was there, and I just had a hard time seeing that happen. I mean, anything was Brown's a very capable guy. I wouldn't be like, oh my god, I can't believe Matt Brown won. No. But all things being equal, leveling that kind of standoff against Robbie Lawler is very difficult to imagine. More likely they trade shots, but that it's Robbie Lawler who isn't just a big power puncher, but a devastating finisher. Fantastic finishing instincts. They both have them, but Lawler's got it just as well. And I think has shown his ability to take a shot. I mean, he got one punch KO'd against Diaz, but I think that Robbie Lawler is long since passed. So people saying, who could they match up with Tyrone Spong with Bader? Jimmy Manuel. Tyrone Spong versus Manuel would be awesome. My mic is messing up. Let's see here. Let's see if this works. Is that better? There you go. Is that better? Slightly? Let me know if the mic is messing up. I'll open my Twitter feed. Your mic is echoing and totally freaking out. All right, let's see here. How about that? Is that better? Here, you know what we're going to do? hang on, hang on, hang on, hang on. Here's what we're gonna do. Okay. How about that? Is that better? Is that better? That should be better. I'm not even talking to the microphone, fools. How can it still be the microphone? Well, if it's, listen, I mean, if it's your microphone is making you sound like a villain from Saw. Well, it shouldn't be. It should be the Logitech camera. Sorry, y'all. This is the nature. This is the nature of the beast. I don't know what to tell you. All right, there we go. Sounds good now. Sorry about that. Let's get back to work. I got questions to answer. Henry Cejudo, it's been announced via UFC Tonight that he's in talks with the UFC. How far do you think he can go? He's an Olympic gold medalist wrestler and currently uses the blah, blah, blah. Your best thing to do is read Coach Mike Reardon on why he thinks Henry Cejudo will not be a big success in mixed martial arts. He wrote a series of posts for Bloody Elbow. I cannot recommend them more highly. And I think he absolutely is correct. UFC gate figures. On big cards, UFC always does very well at the gate, ranging from at least $1 million to well over $6 million. That's for at least 15K seat venue. For example, UFC 168, UFC 148, both over $6 million. I looked at Rihanna's 2013 tour gate figures. She doesn't even come close. Largest figure was $8 million with Dave Guetta, I don't know how to pronounce his name, in London. That was a stadium crowd with nearly 100K people. Eminem's biggest gate was 7 million gate 50K crowd this year. How does UFC manage to sell such expensive tickets and outdo these musical superstars? I don't know. I've always thought UFC tickets were typically very expensive, although I will say, I'll give them credit. The ticket prices for UFC Fight Night 50, which is the Jacare Mousasi card, are very reasonably priced. I don't know if they're on sale yet or if it's sold out yet, or I haven't checked up on that, but they were like 50, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350, somewhere of those price points, basically between 350 and 50, even maybe less than that, even maybe 300. So the kind of card quality you're getting there, you are an idiot if you don't buy that. Absolute idiot. Thoughts on the Lawler-Brown card? So you have, in addition to the main event, Johnson, Nogueira, Guido Bermudez, Thompson, Green. Good card for Fox. Beyond that, Masvidal, Cruikshank, I like. Kingsbury versus Cummins. I don't think too highly of it. Perpetuo versus Means. I like Tim Means, but he really let me down against Neil Magny. And Marco De La Torre versus Brian Ortega. Semi-interested in Brian Ortega. We'll see. The rest of the card is okay. It's what it is, guys. It's high-level regional show past the Cummins fight. Let's see. Manhoff Daly. How far do you see both these sluggers going in Belfort? Champ material, Daly Lima would be an amazing fight. I don't think either of those guys can beat Douglas Lima, just speaking candidly. But I would say that I think Daly has the potential to be a decent, reliable figure for them. Manhoff is just live by the sword, die by the sword. It's going to be really hard for him to gain traction. But certainly Daly, I think, is a signing that makes all the sense in the world. But no, I don't think Daly can beat Douglas Lima. No. Thoughts on the crowd, even at that event, please? The Irish crowd, one of the best crowds in UFC history. Certainly one of the best. 9,000 of them I wouldn't call one of the all-time greatest ever. Pound for pound may be pretty good. Also, I wasn't there. Hard for me to say. But I would say that I've been to England many times, and every time I go, the nicest people are always the Irish. Sorry, England, it's true, man. Y'all are a little bit cold. I wouldn't call you rude exactly, you just don't care. It's the Irish that have been always very, very, very friendly to me every time I go. It is no surprise to me that in rallying behind their hero after a 5-year absence from the UFC that they would be pretty enthusiastic. Also, it was hilarious after McGregor won, and the camera is panning across the audience, and there are so many beers being held, people are looking at each other and they can't even high five, so they're just screaming. That was awesome. Ilir Latifi, 2 first-round finishes in the UFC since dropping a decision on short notice to Masasi, although his last fight was against the newcomer. That's Chris Dempsey, who was, again, I just don't consider a UFC caliber fighter. He did submit Diabate in the first round. What's next for him? Do you see him ever cracking the top 10? No. Ilir Latifi was a guy who couldn't win a round against Emmanuel Newton. I don't know. Good fighter, but not going to crack top 10. Are you surprised by the Vitor Belfort ruling in the NSAC? No. I mean, I guess I'm always going to be surprised by that kind of thing, but not really. Joe Rogan experience. You probably get this a lot, but it'd be fascinating to see you guys talk about MMA Jiu-Jitsu. That is all. Would love to, but I mentioned before, he usually has big-time names on there. I think he'd be wasting his time with me. Luke, Daniel Cormier mentioned after the Henderson fight that he needed to get a procedure done on his knee. Did that ever happen? And if not, will he be 100% ready for the fight? He delayed the procedure, and it sort of worked out to his benefit now that this fight materialized. If MMA had a combine like the NFL, what events would you like to see determine the best athlete for MMA? Well, you don't need to be the best athlete to do well in MMA, but certainly I would measure the power of the double, the speed of it, hand speed. I would measure endurance. Endurance would be one of the most important things ever. It'd be like something equivalent to like the CrossFit games, which are just moronic. But push this sled 50 yards, drag it back, climb this rope, tear down the rope, do 50 squat thrusts, jump in the air, swim with sharks, eat a bowl of M&Ms. You're the fittest man in the world. Crazy. UFC 181 with 3 title fights. There have been reports that the UFC is doing Pettis Melendez, Vitor Weidman, and Rossi Carano all at UFC 181. I think that Rossi Carano will be pushed back to January. Conor versus Poirier. Luke, do you think Conor should have one more fight before Poirier? Nope, I don't. I think he's absolutely ready for it. I don't know if he'll win, but I think that's the right fight right now. Plus, man, it's like those two guys hate each other. They would promote the fight well. Poirier would promote the fight really well. You know, I mean, I don't think he promoted it as well as Conor McGregor, and no one probably ever will, at least not in the featherweight division. But of all the dancing partners you could pick, it's a pretty good one. Norman Park bet. Luke, Norman Park stated after the fight he put a bet on himself to win in the second round. Are fighters allowed to bet on themselves? I saw that too. I didn't know what to make of that, if he was really serious and he really did that, and that he carried Kotani to the second round. If he did, it's deeply unethical, but I don't know if there's any regulation against it. What's he going to do? I guess he can't get in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Okay. Everyone says the thing is fixed. Although I will say one thing about the Irish. This is a true story, man. This is how the Irish get busy. My brother used to work in right outside Leicester Square, not too far from Buckingham Palace, and he doesn't live there anymore. That's why I used to go a lot, was because my brother lived in London, not too far. He lived out in Hammersmith, but then worked in Leicester Square. Anyway, I met him in Leicester Square, and one of his colleagues was Irish, you know, like hardcore Irish, man. And we went to lunch together at like a noodle shop that was nearby. And as you know, like there's American pints, which is just like a glass, and there's English pints, which is like an extra 4 ounces. It's a real pint, yeah. And I'll never forget this, dude. We're sitting there having lunch, and you know, I'm on vacation, mind you. My bro's working, his Irish coworker is working. I'm having lunch. This dude, this Irishman at work, had 5 pints of beer and then went right back to work. Like, I'm a big dude. I can have 5 pints of beer and probably work okay, but it wouldn't be like the greatest working environment. This dude was 150 pounds wet and, you know, wearing boots. My man was. I don't even think he was drunk. I mean, he was a little bit turned up, but it was crazy. I'd never seen a dude drink like that on his work break. Like, he was crushing them, and then went right back to work. Like, it was nothing. He was like Shane McGowan or something. Amateur hour at the NSAC meeting. Luke, were you in Britain? No, those tough times. Thoughts on Eddie Bravo's explanation of the rubber guard? There's a video out. So Hickson Gracie was on the Joe Rogan podcast, which I recommend. And after it was over, Eddie decided he wanted to, if you know, because I guess Hickson was accommodating, wanted to show him not just what the rubber guard was, like, oh, here are these different techniques that I have, but like the theory behind it. And you can see Hickson was like taking it seriously, you know, and listening to everything he had to say. I mean, what he thinks about it in the end, I don't know. And I sort of tweeted about it. I tweeted that I go, I'm not a believer in the rubber guard. You know, that's a bit of a strong statement to make. I sort of walked that back a little bit. You know, there's guys out there like Joe Lazan who have used elements of the rubber guard to strong effect in mixed martial arts. It's not true that a rubber guard doesn't work. It's not what I would say at all. I would just say that, like, it's interesting hearing Eddie explain the logic of it, because some of it makes a lot of sense. And again, it does work in modern MMA. My major complaint about it is that at the elite level, it has limited value. One, because guard play just has limited value generally. And two, in MMA contexts, even when you're trying to, because what part of the guard tries to do is control for slipperiness in the no-gi context, even then it's still hard to do. It's still hard to pull off. And the level of time you have to invest in it to get good at it takes away from all the other time you have to do for the other things that had much more immediate value. In other words, if you were an expert in the rubber guard and you got put on your back, it might have some effect for you. But you can stall in the rubber guard. If you can get both arms inside and hold her, you can just stall. Now they can do things like elbow to you, but you can get picked up and slammed. Like it has value. There's no doubt about it. But you can stall inside the rubber guard. To get good at it takes a lot of time that you could invest elsewhere. There's an opportunity cost there, I think, for at least elite level MMA. But sort of the most interesting thing about it for me was like when he describes about the origin of it, and he's adapted it over time. I understand that. And again, let me make this clear. You know, Eddie Bravo is a hugely accomplished jiu-jitsu practitioner. The rubber guard is, I suck from arm bars from the guard, much less the rubber guard. You know, I don't even pretend to be. I know very little about the rubber guard. I'm just giving you my opinion based on what I know, and you can take that for what it's worth. Maybe nothing to you, maybe it does. I don't know. I want to be honest about that. I do not come to you as like some sort of like deep. I've really given this a ton of. I'm just being honest. But like when he talked about the origin of it and how he came to like the problems he was trying to solve for, even when the problems he was still addressing, it was like anachronistic. Like he was referencing like the Dave Monet Fabiano Iha fight, you know, or things that had happened to like guys who fought Mark Coleman. It's like those problems don't really reveal themselves anymore. Not to say that the rubber guard doesn't have value. Like if someone's on top of you, there are worse things you can do than be in the rubber guard. I'm not saying that at all. But as a finishing, it seems like it's decent for holding guys in place to avoid severe ground and pound. But I just haven't seen a lot of guys finish people with it. And I don't think that necessarily means the rubber guard can't work, but the level of proficiency you have to use it requires an enormous amount of investment and time into it. And by that time, what else have you sacrificed along the way versus just learning how to scramble, get back to your feet, just learning how to wall walk, learning how to defend takedowns outright. So I think the rubber guard probably has some value, but you have to really invest in it. It's time consuming. It's labor intensive. Otherwise, I think we'd see a lot more guys using it in a way that would be much more accessible. It is accessible, it's just a lot of work. So, you know, guys like Joe Lazan, who are like excellent grapplers, guard players to some extent, you know, it makes sense that they could invest time in that and it would naturally weave into their game. I could see that, no doubt about it. There's no denying that it has value. I just think it's kind of limited at the elite level, both in terms of what practitioners have to invest in it, and then once you get there, how it actually affects them. Because you can stall on it. Vitor versus Weidman. Luke, given that the role Vitor has been clouded by the whole TRT issue, what kind of fight do you see happening between Weidman and Vitor? Do you expect Vitor to look noticeably slower or not as explosive? I expect it to look actually kind of similar to the Machida fight, only with a heavier emphasis on takedown. He's not going to give Vitor Belfort an inch to breathe, and he's going to push him back, and he's going to go for takedowns and put him on his back. And you know, all credit to Vitor Belfort's black belt, which is very legitimate. I don't see him getting subbed, period. He'll pass and ground and pound and smash him on top. I absolutely believe that. He's not going to give Vitor Belfort any room to breathe again. Like after that Machida fight, I'm very confident Chris Weidman's going to win that fight. Anything can happen, but true or false? The UFC has a smaller hardcore fan base than they did 5 years ago, with a larger casual fan base. No, they have a bigger hardcore fan base. MMA is an Olympic event by 2024. Hell no. UFC 178 pay-per-view buys do 8 times the amount of UFC 177. No. UFC eventually integrates 2 separate leagues to differentiate world-class talent from novice talent. God, I hope so. Cormier, if I would have such less of an issue with oversaturation if they did that. Cormier takes 2 rounds from Jones. True. I absolutely think that's true. The UFC, if not more, the UFC's ambitious global expansion will be their undoing. No. I don't think it's going to sink the whole thing, no. The UFC has a tendency to put their desire to expand the sport of MMA over the needs of their own brand. The two are related. I would say it's slightly out of balance. Dana White intentionally avoids discussing topics such as oversaturation and fighter pay. Avoids, no, but he doesn't have lengthy discussions about them. Cain Velasquez defeats Jon Jones to defend his heavyweight title in 2015 or 2016. That might be true. Conor McGregor will be the next UFC fighter to sell 1 million pay-per-view buys. The next one. Rousey might do it with Carano. I don't think she will, but at least have to consider that. I see that closer to being like 600,000-700,000, but we'll see. Chael's charisma and ability to remain relevant is undeniable. True. Nationalism dramatically helps build stars. GSP, McGregor, Gustafsson, Velasquez, Bisping, and Weidman. All true. Well, Weidman not so much, but the rest all true. Let's go to Twitter, see if we have any questions from there. Do you think Chael Sonnen should be allowed to do the submission fight in Metamoris? Well, it's not regulated by the government. It's just jiu-jitsu. So, yeah, I mean, it's legal. Was I the editor who ran the Mendenhall Noha the Watt piece? I mean, I didn't commission it. Let's see here. Is sport jiu-jitsu eclipsing traditional jiu-jitsu practices or real-world applicable techniques? Sort of discussed that before. I would say that the sport jiu-jitsu and sport MMA are moving further apart, but in terms of self-defense, you still learn all the things you need to in jiu-jitsu to help yourself. You think Jon Jones will have an even match? And do you answer that one? Do you think MMA fighters use the wrong guard for MMA fights? Sport guard versus fight guard. Here's what I would say. If you're using your guard and you can't get a submission pretty quickly and you can't sweep, you get back to your feet. So that's my order. Try to go for some subs, triangles, arm bars. They're not working. Don't give up position. Try sweeping. If that doesn't work, then get the hell up. Then that's it. Don't spend a lot of time on your back. Which is why it's like, you know, you're going to go for mission control. I mean, I have a hard time seeing it. In your opinion, would it be dirty for Cormier to push Jones against the cage and foot stomp his bad toe? No. Nor would it be, I wouldn't care if Jones went after Cormier's knee either. What impact, if any, do you see the UFC signing Joe Riggs again? None. Do you think that Rickson Gracie can win an MMA fight against fighters currently on the UFC roster? You're going to kill me, but yes, I do think that. Luke, would you rather the Jones fight be postponed for 178 given Cormier's knee injury and not being 100% healthy, or are you okay with BC taking down the challenge with a little less than 2 months to prepare? I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. Did I say time shot, time baby? That's hilarious. Do you find it interesting that Dana White downplayed Conor's vision of being champ by the end of 2014, then turns around and books him in a fight with a top 10 opponent scheduled for 8 weeks after his last fight? No. The Poirier test is important, and you know, it's just a theory of mine. We have no way of knowing. But I think after 174, and partly it's coincidence because some of their champs are getting healthy, right? You have Pettis coming back, Velasquez is going to fight in November, that kind of thing. But I do think after 174, they were like, you know what? Let's make sure we put a little insurance policy on some of these cards. It's just a guess of mine. I have no proof. But I wouldn't be surprised if after the results came back from 174, they're like, okay, time out. Let's put a little extra something, especially in these year-end cards, especially after what happened. Not just that we don't want it to happen again, but like to make up for what already happened. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. So no. But no, I don't think that means that they're going to like fast-track Conor McGregor. Guys, he's not Nostradamus. He's unbelievably charismatic and confident and a hell of a talent, but he does not actually predict the future. I don't know if you know that or not. How replicable is the emerging phenomenon that is Conor McGregor? People say all the time that if only fighters would break out of their shells and be more like McGregor or Chael Sonnen, they would be elevated in the sport. To a certain extent, I agree with this, as there are so many shows and weight classes now at the UFC that they're not constantly beating top 10 or 5 talent. And it's very hard for fighters to stand out unless they can form that connection with the fans. But to me, there is something almost completely unique about Conor as a full package, and I don't believe it's something that can be replicated by a fighter simply by trash talking more. You're absolutely right, and trash talking is not the issue. It's not. If people keep thinking, I wrote about signal to noise. It's not demeaning your opponent. That is certainly one way to do things, and certainly heightening the stakes is a common tactic Muhammad Ali used to do all the time, right? I mean, this is not an unfamiliar game plan. But listen, not everyone's going to have. Conor McGregor is his own guy. There's no doubt about it. But and I'm sure that that's an authentic Conor McGregor that you get, but it's also a showman Conor McGregor. And where one begins and ends is kind of hard to decipher. I'm not accusing him of inauthenticity. I think it's all real, but it's all real and partly a bit of him showing an extreme version of himself, and then blending the two into one unique and highly compelling identity. Again, I don't think it's an act exactly. I just think he's bringing something out of himself. And, for me, I don't think that we can expect people to do what Conor McGregor did. Like, otherwise, everyone would be Conor McGregor. But what you can do is more than what you're getting. Guys are like, I'm just going to let my fist do the talking. Dude, I hope you are ready to wait in line, man. I hope you are ready. It means doing more media. It means giving more of yourself, both to those interviews and to the UFC management. It means taking opportunities when they're given to you. Who do you want to face next? And finding a way to do that. Or it means trash talking. It means maybe being funny. And maybe it means being clever. Forrest Griffin didn't really badmouth many of his opponents, but he still found a way to stand out. And again, not everyone can be funny, but I'm just sort of pointing out that there are ways in which you can give more of yourself to the fight game that makes you much more interesting. If you're going to be guarded about it, that's fine. You don't have to do anything. Just don't talk S about Conor McGregor getting all those opportunities. Right? He's unproven. So what, dude? People love him. You'd be a moron not to book him in a major fight, or have him headline a card in Ireland. You'd be an idiot. It's a no-brainer because the demand for him is strong. He has created it. So it's fine if you don't want to do those things. Just don't be bitter at the dude who did. How would you handle the rest of Conor's fights? I would give him, if he beats Poirier, I would give him Swanson. And if he beats Swanson, he has to fight a wrestler after that. I don't care if it's Lamas, I don't care if it's Edgar, or even Edgar before Swanson. He has to fight a wrestler before he gets a title shot. He has to fight a wrestler and beat a wrestler, a good one. A Lamas, an Edgar, I don't know what to have with Mendez, but something like that. What did you think of the commentating during the UFC Fight Night 46? I found it unbearable during the Gunnar Nelson fight. That's him talking about me. Yeah, they were a little biased for Gunnar Nelson, but I think generally speaking that they do. I like Dan Hardy a lot. The only thing I would say is I miss Joe Martinez. He does the Singapore shows, the East Asia shows for the most part, but he's the only UFC announcer who doesn't scream at you. No, ladies and gentlemen. It's like, dude, relax. No other. It's like that's Bruce Buffer's thing. That's fine, It's his little. That's his way of introducing. But why are you doing it? If Eddie Alvarez makes it to the UFC, how do you see him matching up with the top 10 of his division? Well, until the top 5. With the UFC saying they want a champion to be on a pay-per-view card, do you think they should use multiple titles? For example, have a UFC WC Pride Championship belt. I don't know what that means, but what I would say is having Demetrius Johnson next to TJ Dillashaw, it won't, you're not going to have major pay-per-view success with that, but you couldn't have them independent of one another, or at least by themselves anyway. DC getting inside on Jones. Luke, a lot of people seem to believe that DC will easily get inside Jones's range and ragdoll him like Barnett. Personally, I believe DC will struggle throughout the fight, getting inside consistently enough to win the fight. That's one way. Again, I really think this. I mean, it's going to be hugely interesting. Like, how many fights? Like Conor McGregor's fight against Brandao was like, you thought about like, okay, what ways is McGregor striking going to match up? He might get tested and take down the department a little bit, but it really wasn't about that. It was like with Ben Fulcher, it was like more coronation than anything else, and the fulfillment of Irish expectations. But with DC Jones, you get a real rivalry. I mean, these dudes are like, inboxing each other, calling them daddy and stuff like that. That is, first of all, that's just genuine. And I've interviewed Jon Jones a number of times, man, and he was here in studio, just like 50 feet over from me. When I asked him about Daniel Cormier, he wouldn't even respond to the question, dude. They're genuine, like, go F yourself. But beyond that, the tactical battle is, you talk about two dudes with a lot of ability and really high fight IQ. So, like, even if they didn't have any of that stuff, they've got this incredibly interesting tactical battle that they have to face. That, for me, completely gets me. You can hear me talking about it, how much more interested I am in than that. Like, I'm telling you guys, everyone's got their own tastes in mixed martial arts, dude, but when you watch the highest stuff, it is very hard to go back to the other stuff. It's not impossible. Everyone's going to have things they like, just like fights. I get it. Believe me, I get it. There's guys, I understand. You can spend all your time on Fight Pass. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it. But for me, man, I don't know how you can watch a fight once over and said and done with. I bet you, tactically speaking, Daniel Cormier versus Jon Jones was one of the most interesting fights in UFC history, and I'm willing to bet that right away. Two guys who match up in kind of different, interesting ways. Two guys in different points in their career. Two guys with the heaviest stakes on the line. And guys with just different body types, different skill sets, different things they have to accomplish to set the pace, different things they have to accomplish to establish conditions for winning. Oh, my God, dude. That fight will go down as one of the most technically awesome fights in UFC history. I'm willing to bet it. I'm willing to bet it now. Right now, dude. Right now. So, I don't know what's going to happen, man. I think Jon Jones has his work cut out for him. You guys can say whatever you want about Gustafsson. He's a hell of a fighter. He'll get his time in the title shot, I'm sure. I would hope it's against Jon Jones just for revenge sake, but I think a lot of that first fight was the element of surprise, and I just don't see how that's going to happen again. Against Cormier, man, watch out. A lot of true false today. I'll do a quick one. True false. Jones finishes DC. False. Overeem gets knocked out by Rothwell. I doubt that, but Jesus, who knows. Roy Nelson finishes Mark Hunt in the first round. False. It's false. Jorge Masvidal becomes a top 5. Dude, Nelson versus Hunt. Jorge Masvidal becomes a top 5 lightweight in 2015. Probably not. Chris Weidman versus Vitor Belfort goes to decision. No. False. Chael stays retired and never fights again. True. If Jon Jones loses, even by KO, he gets an immediate rematch. Probably. I mean, if Brandon Barao got one. I lost for different reasons. Nate Diaz returns to the Octagon this year without any change to his contract. False. Pettis finishes Gilbert Melendez inside 3 rounds. False. Robbie Lawler finishes Brown and then gets finished by Hendricks in the rematch. True. Nate Diaz and the needle. Luke, Dana was critical of Nate Diaz and his ability to be a draw and move the needle. He also blasted Mike Hogan for defending Nate with statistics. Does Dana have a point in your opinion, or is he just being here? Well, listen, he has a certain perspective, which is that he doesn't want to be leveraged. They did it with Melendez and Bellator because they got leverage and didn't have much of a choice. But from a negotiating standpoint, Nate Diaz's position is not particularly strong. Even though I favored Nate Diaz in this particular dispute, I mean, it's fairly easy to look at the circumstance and just be like, don't have a lot to go on here. No one else can sign you. That's the best way to get any employer, UFC, Maximus Nation, Sears, whoever, to give you a better offer as a contract is to
bring in a competing offer, right? So he doesn't have a particularly strong viewpoint. But here's what I would say: like, do I agree with Dane? Because he doesn't really say what move the needle really means. Like, what does that mean? It doesn't define it. I think some people took it to mean pay-per-view. And on that level, I think Dana White has a point that Nate Diaz is not a proven commodity or draw on pay-per-view. However, in a 50 event calendar year, which might go to 60 or 70 next year, if you think about that, drawing on pay-per-view is not the sum total of value. Having a guy who can headline a card in interesting bouts, who is a top-ranked lightweight that fans want to see and put him on live TV or even Fight Pass, to me, seems like that's of value to you. This is not the sum total of needle moving is not pay-per-view. And on television, I wouldn't call Nate Diaz like a tremendously huge. Oh my God, it's amazing ratings, but very good ratings. He can pull the right numbers, particularly with the right matchup. And the only thing that sort of like caught my interest was that Dana White berated the media and made fun of Dave Meltzer for losing his Yahoo job, which had nothing to do with Dave's performance. About the UFC on Fox 3 ratings and how good they were, and then says that he didn't do good ratings on Fox. It's just like, so we were right the first time. The media was right for saying the ratings were that. I mean, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but the fact is that there is enough evidence to suggest that he is valuable as a headliner for live TV, and maybe even the live gate, depending on where he competes. And that in a 50 event calendar. For the Ultimate Fighting Championship, that to me seems like a pretty valuable guy. One more. Good question, and I had no idea. What would it take PED-wise for a fighter to not get licensed to fight again? I'm assuming that what happened to Chael Sonnen might make a difference if he were a champion who had to be stripped of his title and stuff. Maybe that might do it. But I don't really know. You must have to inject in front of the NSAC to get them to do anything. Last one, New York Times article on Rupert Murdoch. I was reading the NY Times article on Rupert Murdoch's attempt to make Fox Sports 1 competitive with ESPN. It seems that the merger with Time Warner is in part driven by a desire to acquire the sports licenses such as PGA, NBA, MLB, NASCAR, and so forth. I also saw no mention of Fox's partnership with the UFC on either Big Fox or Fox Sports 1. Is this more likely to be because the New York Times is an out-of-touch media outlet and doesn't see the value of MMA in general, and the UFC in particular, or is this that the UFC is such small potatoes, even as compared to secondary sports such as golfing, that these deals don't register as a blip on the radar? Well, I would not call the NY Times out of touch. It's the leading, it's the best journalism outlet in the world. So out of touch seems a bit like a fairly strong condemnation. However, I think that they're focusing on things that, well, first of all, the NBA and MLB and NASCAR are going to be, pretty lucrative deals. We'll see what happens with NASCAR because they break their deals up across different networks. But I think it's partly they just don't realize the value that UFC has for Fox Sports 1, certainly. The other is that these other deals in totality, especially since a new NBA deal is coming up soon or in a couple of years. I'm not sure what the PGA deal is, and also I don't know how well it's going to do without Tiger. But I think generally speaking, that they just see these as more visible sports properties. People are more cognizant of the value of them as a ability to compete against ESPN. They don't realize that it's been a story of the career. I had a discussion once with someone at the Washington Post. MMA does huge traffic. Again, nothing like NFL. NFL does just more people care about it, but. You'd be surprised. The audience for MMA is totally web native, totally web digital. Look at our video numbers. We compete with anybody, any sport with our video library and what we're able to produce, and live events we do really well too. But people just don't realize that because they think MMA is so niche and so different that it couldn't possibly give you those kinds of returns, but it does. It absolutely does. Also, it may be the case that the PGA, NBA, MLB, and NASCAR, they're able to more easily leverage that with advertising opportunities. It's a little bit harder to leverage MMA for that. So maybe that played a role into it as well. Or maybe it's just dumbass oversight. I don't know. All right, with that, we have to get out of here. You can email me at SBN Luke Thomas. I apologize for the microphone errors. We'll work this out. It's a work in progress. This, by the way, is the 98th chat. Next time is the 99th chat I've done. So thank you very much for following me, even through all the errors and all the mistakes and all the things I've done right and done wrong. I appreciate everyone's contribution in watching this. Email me at luke.thomas@sbnation.com. Plenty of coverage for you. Open workouts were today in San Jose, so expect photos, expect videos, expect one-on-ones, and we'll deliver it. See you guys for UFC on Fox 12 on Saturday. Until next time, stay frosty.